The moment a veterinarian observed an unusual ultrasound of a tigress that was pregnant, they immediately contacted the police. Growing up, John Pringle was surrounded by various animals, including 2 dogs, 2 cats, guinea pigs, rabbits, and more. This exposure to different creatures fueled his love for animals, and he knew from a young age that he wanted to work with them in the future. Upon reaching adulthood, John decided to establish his own zoo. He dedicated himself to sourcing a diverse range of exotic animals to populate it, from wolves to lions, and took great pride in his collection. Nonetheless, his favorite animal amongst all those under his care was the tiger. The impressive size and stunning fur of tigers left John in awe, and he thoroughly enjoyed observing them in their enclosure as they went about their activities. However, he wasn't the only one who found these big cats fascinating, as many of the zoo's visitors shared his admiration for them. As a result, the tiger enclosure often attracted a large crowd of curious park guests eager to catch a glimpse of these amazing animals. Overall, John's zoo housed only 2 tigers, 2 females, whom John had named Julie and Shade. The 2 tresses could often be found lounging around their enclosure, enjoying the sun. However, to get them to be a bit more interesting for the guests, sometimes John would come up with fun ways to feed the animals, such as freezing their meat in a block of ice, which the big cats had to push around. The zookeeper would also hang the tigers' food from high trees and hide it around the enclosure. This would get the animals to jump around and play, which would entertain the guests. However, only a few years after opening the zoo, attendance numbers started to decline. Without guests paying to come and see the animals, the zoo started losing money, and John was worried that he would have to eventually close the attraction and send his animals elsewhere. In order to prevent this from happening, the man decided that a good way to bring in new customers would be to introduce a baby animal to the park. And as the tigers were his favorite animals, he decided to breed them. For the next few months, John tried everything he could to find a male tiger to breed with his females. However, no matter where he looked, he could not find a legitimate breeder with a viable male. Getting quite desperate to have a baby tiger cub, John began to look at shadier businesses who might be able to help him. Eventually, the man was able to find a person who had a male tiger whom they were happy to let breed with the tigress, Julie. John was ecstatic and made the appointment as quickly as possible. However, one of the key stipulations to having the male tiger was that the breeders wanted Julie to be taken to their enclosure and left with them whilst she became impregnated. John was a bit skeptical at first, however. He was determined to have some tiger cubs, and he agreed to the breeders' terms. Before long, Julie was displaying signs of being pregnant, so John had a vet visit the zoo to determine whether or not she was going to have any cubs. In the ultrasound that the vet did, he confirmed that the tigress was pregnant and that all of her cubs looked to be healthy and growing well. John couldn't believe it. His dreams were going to come true, and he was going to have a litter of tiger cubs to help promote the zoo. As the months went by, Julie began to grow bigger and bigger. It was easy to tell that the tigress was pregnant, and she looked like she was ready to give birth any day soon. However, despite her size and apparent discomfort, Julie refused to give birth to her cubs. John was very confused. He did not know why the big cat did not want to have her babies. He had even made sure that the enclosure and her birthing cage were as comfortable and safe as possible, so that Julie did not become too stressed. But despite everything the zoo owner did for her, the tigress simply refused to have her cubs. Worried about the animal's health, along with her babies, John decided to call a vet to see if they could discover what was wrong. However, when the vet got to the zoo to examine the animal, he noticed something very strange and immediately called the police. When the vet arrived at John's zoo, he quickly went over to the tigress who had laid down and couldn't get back up again. The animal seemed in severe pain, and both the vet and John were worried that something was seriously wrong with the big cat. The vet began to check Tigress' stomach to see if he could feel anything unusual, and he was surprised when he came across a strange, hard lump in a lower abdomen. Concerned about what it could be, the vet quickly sedated Julie and began to do an ultrasound on Earth to see what he could find. After a few minutes, the vet suddenly stopped the ultrasound and told John that he needed to make a quick phone call. Confused, John agreed and watched as the vet walked off. A few minutes passed and the vet came back into the surgery at which point John asked him if everything was okay with his tiger. The vet reassured the man that everything would be fine, but he needed to wait for some backup, as he needed to perform a little surgery. Around 15 minutes passed before John suddenly heard a siren. It sounded like the police, and more than that, it sounded like they were heading towards the zoo. Sure enough, only moments later a police car pulled up to the zoo, and 2 officers got out. John asked the vet what was going on, to which the man replied that he believed that there was an illegal implant in the tigress, which was causing her a lot of pain. The vet then told John that he would have to perform a small surgery to get the implant out of the animal. Whilst he was doing this, the police questioned John about where he had gotten his tigers from, why he was breeding them, and who he had used as a breeder. Thoroughly confused and concerned, John answered all of the questions as honestly as he could. He told the police of the breeder he had used and how they had made him give them Julie whilst he was trying to get her pregnant. The police explained to John that the breeder he had used was notorious for selling exotic animals on the black market, and that he had probably put the implant in the tigress to keep track of her and her cubs. By doing this, he would then be able to come and steal the cubs to sell them later. John was astounded at this discovery. He had no clue that someone would do such a thing to these majestic and innocent animals. Once the police were satisfied with John's report, they collected the implant from the vet and left the zoo in the hopes that they would finally be able to catch the breeder. As for Julie, the vet helped her give birth to 3 adorable and healthy tiger cubs. However, when John finally saw the baby tigers, he couldn't believe his eyes. One of them was a pure white tiger, a very rare animal. The man came to the realization that it was probably this cub that the breeder was going to try and steal. Thankfully, the police and the vet were able to help him out, so that he could have an adorable tiger family to look after at his zoo. After a few days of resting, John eventually let Julie and her babies back out into their enclosure. The cute family brought many new customers to the zoo, which meant that it could stay open. John's greatest joy was witnessing the close-knit family of tigers interacting and playing harmoniously with one another, exceeding his expectations. Shortly after the cubs were born, the police informed John that they had apprehended the breeder who implanted Julie, and he was elated by the news. With the breeder responsible for implanting Julie in police custody, John felt relieved that his tigers were no longer at risk and could grow up together in a safe and happy environment. This story is truly heartwarming. Please share your thoughts about it in the comments section below. I hope you liked this video. Please share and subscribe to our channel. Also press the bell icon to never miss the update from our channel. Thank you.